Healing Warrior Hearts is a 2.5-day retreat that we put together for veterans to deal with emotional wounds of military service. And it is not just, as some people sometimes think, for combat veterans. People experience in the military emotional wounds stateside and in non-combat situations. For example, military sexual trauma, or the LGBT veterans who had lots of challenges when they were not being accepted in the military. Don't ask, don't tell, and things of that nature. And so there are a lot of reasons that veterans come home with emotional wounds that are not resolved, that they carry with them. And so we put together this 2.5-day retreat, and the focus of the retreat is bonding with veterans in the here and now, being welcomed by a community. So the staff of the retreat is both veterans and civilians. So they're welcomed home into community, and civilians and fellow veterans are hearing their stories. And by telling the full story, they have a chance to integrate or reintegrate that experience so that they can let it go or not deal with as much emotional residue from the experience. You know, I don't really know the full number of veterans that we've served. We started doing this work in 1993. The program was called Bamboo Bridge, and it was focused on Vietnam vets. And then in the subsequent years, as we had other theaters of combat and other theaters of action, we decided to change the name, and it is now today Healing Warrior Hearts. So we've been doing this work for over 25 years. And one of the reasons I say I can't tell you for sure how many veterans we've served is that once a veteran goes through the program, they can come back and staff and function as a guide. And so they're learning and growing through that process as well. And so how do I count, how does anyone count the number of vets that we've served? The vets that are on staff, the vets that are guides, the vets who come through the first time, the vets who sometimes come through a second and third time because they got so much out of it and they still have more to deal with. So it's hundreds, I can tell you that for sure, probably well over 1,000. It's real common for people who have experienced trauma to compartmentalize that trauma in an attempt to not have it influence their relationships, their everyday lives. And so when someone does work like Healing Warrior Hearts and they reintegrate or integrate that traumatic experience so that a lot of emotional charge is off of it, now they're emotionally available. They're emotionally available to their family. They're emotionally available to their friends. They're more stable in their day-to-day lives emotionally. They do a better job at work because they're more stable emotionally. And they're freer and more open emotionally, so they have better relationships, so they get their jobs done better. So the ripple effect is huge. And so employers are affected, fellow employees are affected, families are affected, and communities are affected, because one of the things that's true about almost every veteran I've ever met is that they have a strong desire to serve and have a mission. And so what frequently happens when people go through our program is they go on to do something as a vocation or an avocation, a volunteer. That's their mission. They go on to help fellow veterans, or maybe they go on to help a nonprofit cause in their community or something in their church. And then there's all those people that they affect. So the ripple effect of this work is absolutely huge. Well, it's sadness. Grief is a word that we use for sadness. It's about loss. When we lose something from our lives, and I don't mean to diminish anybody's feelings when I say this, but we can grieve over losing car keys, and we can grieve over losing someone we love. It's a spectrum of emotion, but it's the natural human response to loss. A very simple example is I was given a challenge coin by a command sergeant major who went through our program, who's now deceased, and it's disappeared. I can't find it anywhere. And I have for days now had this feeling like part of me was missing, because it meant so much to me to have my work recognized by the CSM and to have that coin and to remember, yeah, it really matters. And now I can't find it. And sometimes when I think about it, I actually feel tears. So we have different levels of attachment and connection to all kinds of things in our world. With veterans, frequently what we see is we see grieving over the loss of folks that they served with who died, whether it was in service or after they came home, suicide or other deaths. We see grief of the loss of their innocence. You know, so many of our military are young kids, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, who haven't even had a fully developed frontal cortex yet. And we put them in the middle of war and combat, and they lose their innocence. And then there's this whole realm of moral injury, which is the idea that we're asked to do things in the military that are sometimes against the core spiritual principles that we've learned, you know, like the respect for human life. How do you take another life? Yes, it's an enemy. Yes, they're about to shoot you. Yes, it might be self-defense, but there's still a deep injury, wound to the soul having done that. And then there's a whole process of grieving around that. So there's many different kinds of loss that happens, and grief and sadness are our natural and beneficial reaction to loss, because it reminds us how much we loved and how much we cared and how strong our values were, that we grieve not just a few tears, but we deeply grieve the loss of that. Sure. So what happens in the military is you get deeply bonded with a group of people. Many times you've put your life on the line with that group of people. You've put your life on the line for others in that group. Others have put their life on the line for you. So there's a really deep emotional bond that happens. And it's a very intense relationship. It's a 24/7 relationship for 18 months, 2 years, whatever the length of service is. And when anyone leaves that, there's a sense of loss. So there's the emotional sense. This person isn't right here anymore. I can't walk 20 feet and find them. I can't talk to them almost any time I want. There are many times people are dispersed all over the country, maybe even all over the planet now, so that there's not a close relationship in that way. There's the grief and the loss of the container. So in the military, there's the rules and regulations about what you wear, and you don't think a whole lot about what you eat. It's pretty much just given to you, and you're given orders about how to spend your time. And so that's a very tight container. And then they come home to this very expansive container, to the grocery store with 120 different types of toothpaste, to the clothing store with 30 different types of blue jeans to wear, to the TV with 300 channels. You know, I mean, there's just so many choices to make, and it's so expansive that there is a loss of safety, a loss of emotional safety, a loss of that container. And that's a grieving process too, and a transition process. A lot of times we think of grieving just in terms of people, but you know, there's many other different levels for that. People just close down. I don't want to feel this. And so they attempt to compartmentalize it and ignore it. And what ends up happening then is to deal with that emotion, then they use drugs, and they use alcohol, and they use sex, and they use food, and anything that's going to give them that temporary dopamine rush that's going to make them feel good for just a little while, so they can ignore all of that pain. And that's a really big issue for very many veterans, is that they're in an addiction process of some kind, one of those versions, and they don't know how to get out of it. The other way that people deal with grief is to find extreme situations to be in, you know, like extreme sports or motorcycle riding at 100 miles an hour or something of that nature. And others deal with their grief with adrenaline. They want to go back into the service, they want to go back into combat, or they go into law enforcement, or they go into something else that's going to give them that adrenaline rush that's going to keep them on alert and in the now so they don't have to think about the past. Well, the most healthy way to grieve is to cry it out, to feel it. And the thing is that sometimes that's so big that it doesn't feel safe to do it by oneself, because if I start to cry, the tears will never end. And so it's a good idea to have a buddy. You know, the whole idea of a battle buddy, somebody you can call. In 12-step groups, it's having a sponsor. In some of the veteran area, some of the communities, there are peer support, veteran peer support. They can go to them. They can do work at the VA. They can do work out in the community. We're bringing back a program that we used to do that we stopped doing for a short while called Grief Relief. And it's a 2-day program for people to come and just simply look at the grieving process and have a safe place to say, this is what I'm feeling, and to let those tears flow. Well, I think the most important thing for all of us to know is that there's no shame in grief. Grief is an honoring of the connection and the bond that was there, of something good and valuable that is gone. So grieving is a good thing. There's no shame in grief. So the best thing to do to honor National Grief Day, or to do something that day, is to think about the losses that you've had, and to let yourself just feel that sadness that goes with those losses, whatever that is. And if there's tears, let the tears flow. And if there's no tears, then there's no tears. It's not always crying. But to be honest with oneself about how much we've cared, which is why we grieve when we've lost. So when I say to honor that grieving process, it's about, I really loved this guy that was in my unit that I was like a brother to or a sister to. I really loved that sense of being of service, and I don't feel like I have a mission, so I'm sad. But start with the I really loved, because that focuses in on the heart and helps to reopen the heart again.